last time we talked, and it's been quite a while, you were heavily into a plant-based diet. In writing this book and continuing to learn the health realm, has that changed over the last little bit?
It's changed a lot for me. Yeah. About, 4 or 5 years ago, I was mostly plant-based. And, I think that as I've learned more, I've moved away from personally being plant-based. I think there's absolutely a way to have a metabolically healthy plant-based diet. But I think um, what I've come to really understand more is that a big root cause of why we're chronically ill at this point is that our food is industrial on every level, from the way it's grown to the way it's actually manufactured. And it's the industrialization of our agriculture system that is truly not only making the food system very fragile and not resilient, but it's also truly depleting the nutrients from our food. So just to give people a little bit of history, like over the past 100 years, for the sake of efficiency and food production, which, sound great, but it hasn't really worked out. We basically took traditional farming methods and said, we're going to just mechanize everything. We are going to spray the crap out of these fields with synthetic pesticides and synthetic fertilizers, which, by the way, these fertilizers that we're spraying come from fossil fuels, and we're spraying them all over the food and the soil. So we're killing a lot of the pests, quote unquote, but also all the biodiverse microbial life in our soil. And a teaspoon of soil should have trillions of microorganisms, which are literally there to alchemize sun and water and soil into nutrient-rich plants. But we just sterilized it. We killed it all for the sake of, pest control. So now we have food that doesn't have the alchemy in the soil to create the nutrient-rich food. So our food is actually like, even if we're eating a whole food diet, if it's grown in conventional soil that's using mechanized tilling, the fields are being used year round to produce as much as possible, but not having the sort of yin periods in between where the soil can replete itself, and they're being sprayed with synthetic pesticides and fertilizers, the food is depleted. And because that food is becoming our bodies, we are basically, a lot of the volume that we're taking in is actually doing so much less work for us. It's doing less in terms of giving us the nutrients we need to build the body and less of the nutrients for the body to function properly. So how this comes back to sort of like vegan and more omnivorous is that when you really look at what creates the healthiest soil possible, it's actually merging plants and animals into ecosystems together. So you have the animals roaming the fields that the plants are being grown, and, like, not to be too graphic, but like they're pooping on the soil. And that feces is literally filled with microbial life that reinvigorates the life of the soil. The nitrogen in their urine is super important for the nitrogen cycle in the soil. You've got their hooves gently agitating the soil as opposed to the aggressive mechanized tilling. And so there's this beautiful interdependency between animals and plants that ultimately is both really good for the animals and it's really good for the plants. Because then, of course, the animals are eating, around what we're growing for food. They're basically weeding the fields by eating this. And it's this beautiful ecosystem that we've broken with industrial agriculture. And when you take that sort of down the path, you kind of realize that humans are a part of that ecosystem too. So there's something around animals, plants, and humans in a beautiful interdependent ecosystem that is kind of as natural as it gets. And both the animals and the plants suffer when you separate. So that's kind of really reflecting on, like, what is the most natural circle of life and ecosystem that we could possibly create. And what that brings you towards is much more of, I think, an omnivorous, balanced, system that is the highest quality possible food. So it's the essentially organic, regenerative, animals and plants. So I've moved from straight vegan to obsession with food sourcing and food quality, and only want to eat plants and animals that have been grown in a precious, pure, interdependent ecosystem that is sustainable and resilient. And because I believe that the food I'm putting into my body, if it's grown in a sustainable, resilient way that maximizes nutrient per gram, that is ultimately going to lead to a better body for myself by giving my body what it needs to function properly. So that's kind of what's moved me away. And I think also, I think I got pretty far down the path of animal rights and, animal cruelty and things like that. Like, hey, if I'm doing well on a vegan diet, why would I ever want to take the life of an animal? But the reality is that over like 99% of our food in the country is grown conventionally, meaning with the industrial agriculture, the pesticides, the fertilizers, and literally nothing could be worse for biodiversity on our planet and like holistic animal life than industrial agriculture. So, if you really back up and think about the amount of we're facing a mass extinction in terms of biodiversity on our planet right now between bacteria, fungi, nematodes, small animals and birds. And a lot of that is driven by the conventional agriculture system, which is where a lot of our vegan food is coming from, especially the processed vegan food. And I think a lot less animals' lives would be tortured, and species ended if we actually focused on more of a traditional scaling, a traditional regenerative, sustainable food system that involves both animals and plants.
All right. So to read between the lines, it sounds like you've included more animal products because of the farming, the ecosystem, the holisticness of the practice of producing the food, and for the nutrition that you're getting from it.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And I think a big part of the why we're sick right now is a disconnection. Our chronic disease epidemic is fundamentally rooted in disconnection. We've ignored the connection between the root causes of why we're sick. We've ignored the connection between human health and environmental health. And we've done a lot for the sake of efficiency, like, oh, just drug it. Oh, just eat the packaged food. And none of that's really working because the reality is that we are, as humans, we're not separate from any of this. We are totally interdependent with all of it: the food, the water, the air, the animals, the bacteria, our cells. And the way forward, I think, for human health and planetary health is respecting the interconnectedness, which fundamentally on a bigger sort of spiritual level is kind of like transcending the ego that we know is the root of suffering and realizing that we're all really interconnected, and then eating and living in a way that respects that rather than tries to outsmart it. A lot of why we're sick is because we tried to outsmart these perceived inefficiencies, like, getting sick, having a virus. Oh, we just have to like manage all those symptoms. Or, oh, food takes a while to grow and prepare, eat processed food. But in trying to seek efficiency and convenience, we're actually breaking these key cycles that are required for our health. So to kind of, wrap it up, I think anything we can do to rebuild connection with all these different aspects of our fundamental life source, the food, the sun, clean air, clean water, is going to be helpful for our health. So it's really about respecting the connections and not ignoring them as we've done out of, I think, human hubris over the last 100 years.
Last time we talked, I think your diet was around 95% plant-based. Are you open to talking about where that's at today and how it's evolved to where it is?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I would say I probably eat, I still love plants, and the power of plants are incredible. The power of sustainably grown plants. So I'd say I eat about probably, I aim for about, 30 to 50 grams of protein per meal. And I'd say probably about 75% of that is coming from animal protein. I still love to get my protein from nuts, seeds, beans, legumes. But I'm eating, essentially my diet right now is all regeneratively raised meats. So elk, bison, venison, pasture-raised meat, pasture-raised organic eggs, fully pasture-raised foraging poultry. I have relationships with some hunters, so I actually have like little bags of venison that have literally, I know the person who has been out there, so that feels really, really good. And then I get almost all my produce from the farmers market, so relationships with farmers who I know are using good soil practices, and that makes up a huge percentage of my diet. So just as many colorful fresh fruits and vegetables as I possibly can, and then organics, nuts, seeds, beans and legumes, and as many spices as humanly possible. So that's kind of, just the mix, really just thoughtfully sourced, nutrient rich whole foods that don't have synthetic pesticides on them.
You mentioned the fact that you focus on protein when it comes to having your meals. Why is that?
Yeah, so protein, I think, is such an incredible macronutrient because it's highly satiating and it has a high thermic effect. So it takes a lot of energy to actually burn the protein when you're digesting it. So you get kind of a lot of bang for your buck. And we know that actually in our gut, there's cells that are nutrient sensing cells that have these little cell receptors in the gut that can essentially taste and pick up different amino acids from protein. And when they touch those amino acids, they are going to secrete satiety hormones in the body, like on your behalf to help you feel full. And so, protein is really valuable because it's actually the stimulant that allows your body to make the hormones that reduce your cravings and make you feel full. And one thing that I think is so interesting in the conversation right now in the zeitgeist is like, we're talking so much about Ozempic and these GLP-1 agonists, and, we need to have more GLP-1 in the body. But I just laugh because our bodies are little GLP-1 factories. But the way that they become GLP-1 secreting factories to make us not hungry is these nutrient sensing cells of the gut, like the L cells, need to be stimulated with the right inputs. And one of those inputs, of course, is protein. And so that's how I think about it, really, is like it's both, this incredible piece of communication to my body that I have gotten sort of what I need and I can stop, eating. And that becomes effortless, right? Because once those hormones are secreted, it's not a choice. You're just like, you just feel full. I don't want more food. So that's great about protein. The second piece is that it's an anabolic stimulus for the body to build muscle and, store those amino acids in muscle cells. And I think being in my late 30s now, and really seeing what's happening with women's health, which is just like really on the decline. And a lot of that, I think, is because women essentially become frail because our hormones decline starting in our late 30s and then of course towards menopause. And one of the things that does is essentially make us weaker. It makes our bones weaker, it makes our muscles weaker. And so we have to respond to the natural declines that are happening in hormones by giving in other inputs that tell our body to stay strong and build. And one of those inputs is protein, which is going to stimulate some of the pathways to keep this metabolic armor of our muscle and our, strong, and let us be, warriors into our old age. And so I'm upping my protein more as I get older because I really want to make sure that I'm keeping my muscle mass, stable and hopefully building it over the years to counteract the natural declines that are going to happen.
All right. So prioritizing protein, mixed diet. Let's talk about meal timing. When do you typically break your fast, in the morning or in the afternoon? And how do you look at that and how has it evolved over the years?
Yeah, I think about meal timing in two dimensions. The first is that meal timing is one of the three ways that we can help our body essentially know what time it is. So, something really interesting about, I think, our chronic disease development over the past 100 years is that a lot of it, I think, is confusion about what we would call chronobiology, the body sort of knowing what time it is. We're diurnal animals, meaning that we have certain biologic activities that happen during the daytime and certain biologic activities that happen during the nighttime. And the body basically needs to be on this two-phase clock for us to be healthy. And part of that is natural. The body sort of knows due to clock genes and things like that, that it's day or night. But actually, a lot of our external cues help entrain those internal sort of clock pathways to know what time it is. The three main ways we can do that is when we eat, whether we're consistent with our bedtimes and wake times, and then if we see sunlight, during the day and get rid of the light at night. Like those are the three ways we sort of have to tell the body it's daytime or it's nighttime. So part of meal timing is just about how do I tell my body we're in the active phase of the diurnal cycle and we're eating. So I try to eat most of my meals during the sunlight hours, basically. And try, but it's hard to eat them at fairly consistent times. So my body is sort of on a schedule and I'm not creating kind of mass confusion. If you think about the modern world, think about it. Like we don't go outside that much during the day and we have our blue light on during the night. So the body literally is just like, I'm so confused. It's sort of dark during the daytime and it's light at nighttime. Like what time is it? We eat our meals at totally erratic times. The average American is eating over a 15-hour window every day. So the body's kind of like, it's always the eating phase. Wait, I thought I was supposed to have a rest phase, but we're not giving it that. And then our bedtimes are super inconsistent. Typically in America, we'll bounce around weekends versus weekdays. We don't have unlike children, we don't have a bedtime or a wake time for most of us as adults. So our bodies are in mass confusion chronobiologically, and meal timing is one of the ways we can support that. So I would say the way I think about it is like, how do I give my body a schedule? So usually that means eating my first meal around 11 a.m. or noon. I usually eat kind of a midday lunch snack around 2, 3, and we eat dinner around 6, 6:30, and then I try and wind down the food for the night. So kind of a compressed eating window. And then the second reason, aside from chronobiology, that I think it's helpful to have kind of like a set eating window is because that gives your body a huge amount of time when you're not eating to lower the insulin levels, lower the glucose levels, and actually use any excess stored energy substrates in your body that aren't coming in by mouth. So that's when you give your body the opportunity to like not have to do the work to stimulate insulin secretion, and you get the insulin low. And that's when you start actually tapping into your fat burning and build the metabolic flexibility. So those are the two reasons. And I personally, right now in my life, am choosing to fast. I actually fast from Sunday night to Tuesday morning. My partner and I have been doing that for quite a while. So like a 36-hour fast once a week, which I do not recommend to everyone, but it's something that we just started as like a New Year's challenge. And it's actually something we've continued because there's something pretty amazing about, I prick my finger and I check my ketones, and they can get up to like 1, I think it's millimole per liter by about that 36-hour fast. And at baseline, I'm more at like 0.2, 0.3. And I just love knowing that I'm bathing my cells in more ketones like once per week, because ketones are a very positive biologic signal to the brain and the body, anti-inflammatory and really like a regenerative molecule. And so for me, I'm really enjoying doing that to kind of get into that. And I find a different mental clarity by Tuesday morning, and I feel lighter. And I know I'm probably have churned through a lot of my liver glycogen. And for me, that's a nice reset that does not appear to be causing stress on my body. I think my lifestyle right now is it's fairly low stress, so I can handle that. But I would caution people, like, fasting is a stressor on the body. So if this is why you really need to personally evaluate if this is something that's either helping you or hurting you. But for me right now at this moment in life, it's helping me.
You talked about that benefit of the ketones and bathing your body in them once a week. It gets me thinking about hacking that in different ways throughout the week. Are you somebody that likes to have certain days where you're on a ketogenic diet to get there as well, or hacking that through exogenous ketones, MCT oil, or is that period that you're fasting enough for you in the week?
Yeah, I'm always thinking about I don't, eat any refined carbohydrates or like added sugars. And so my body is typically, I'm not on a low carb diet, but the beauty about, we want to expose our body to ketones. And I think what you're getting at is there's lots of different ways to do that. And when I was vegan and I was on a somewhat higher carbohydrate diet, I was still able to get into ketogenesis because you can use these other tools. One of the most beautiful ways you can do it is maybe you're eating a slightly higher carbohydrate diet, which honestly can be really good for many women, not refined grains, but higher, plant carbohydrates. And then use intermittent fasting. So maybe a longer fasting window each night to just make sure you're kind of churning through some of the stored glucose and actually tapping into fat burning and creating ketones. So pairing slightly higher carbohydrate with longer intermittent fasting windows each night, maybe 14 hours or 16 hours, is a way to start building some ketogenesis in the body without actually necessarily going keto. Similarly, an extended fast can do that. So I'm certainly not on a ketogenic diet, but can make ketones by doing my extended fast once a week. And then, MCT oil is, another way that you can kind of give this fuel straight to the mitochondria to, create ketones. There's also exogenous ketones that you can take. I use the HVMN ketone IQ shots. I love those on my fasts actually, because they really cut through hunger. But the best way to really kind of figure it out for yourself, because there's no one size fits all, is to just buy a ketone monitor. I like the one you can get it on Amazon for like $40. It's the Keto Mojo, and it tests ketones, and you just prick your finger. And I think once you start to experiment a little bit, okay, like if I fast for 10 hours, what are my ketones in the morning? If I fast for 14 hours, what are my ketones in the morning? And if you're, I think, getting up to like 0.5, 0.7, 0.8, 0.9, like that's your body's circulating ketones. And that's great, because if I eat birthday cake and some sugar or something like that, like my ketones will be 0 the next day. Like it is very clear to see how the diet and the fasting impacts it. So just buying a monitor and testing some of these different strategies out can be, I think, the best way to find like what works for you. So
You did hit the nail on the head, though. I was just trying to assess whether you use different tools to get to that same state as you do in the longer fast.
It's flexible. Yeah. It's like sometimes it's intermittent fasting, sometimes it's extended, sometimes it's ketone shots. And then, of course, it's always eliminating the refined grains and refined sugars, because those are just those are largely going to kick you out of ketogenesis, and our body just doesn't need them.
So when you do this longer fast, did you say 36 hours?
Yes.
And what will you consume during that period? Just water, or do you have coffee, tea,
Yeah,
certain supplements to enhance that period of time? I'm just curious. This is I didn't realize you were doing this.
Yeah, I mean it's just an experiment, for me. Definitely don't recommend it for everyone, but it's what I do is just water. Sometimes I'll do a little bit of salt and lemon juice in the water just for some electrolytes. I take all my vitamins except for my multivitamin, because the multivitamin gives me a huge stomach ache if I take it not on an empty stomach. But I can take my fish oil, my curcumin, magnesium, zinc, and timeline urolithin A. None of those hurt my stomach. I think it's the B vitamins mostly in the multivitamin that make my stomach hurt. So I just take all my vitamins except for that. And then ketones. And then I take Ketone IQ. I usually take 2 or 3 of those throughout the day, which totally cut through the hunger. And I'll drink some Spindrift sometimes, which has like 0 sugar and 5 calories. It's basically sparkling water with like a tiny, tiny bit of fruit juice. So a couple things here and there. And I do drink coffee, and I put just like a tiny bit of coconut oil, very little, or maybe like a tablespoon of milk. So I'm definitely taking in some stuff, but for me with the ketone monitoring, I can just track whether it's like working or not, and for me, I can still get up to like 0.8 or 1 millimoles of ketones, even with those things. Maybe I could get up to 1.5 if I didn't. And then, of course, exercise is a piece of it too. If, we have a hike behind our house that we do almost every day that's about 2.5 miles, kind of straight uphill. So if I do that during a fast, I can probably generate some more ketones than if I don't. And the one thing I'm probably just not going to do is lift weights on that day. So I love to take long walks and, just churn through more of those substrates during the fast. But I'm not going to do high intensity interval training or weightlifting, because I'm not repleting the amino acids or any carbs after that workout. So I feel like it's just less bang for my buck. But walks are super great.
If you enjoyed that clip, you're going to want to head over here and catch a full episode. I'll see you over there.
Everyone needs to care about this, because metabolism and metabolic health, it is the core foundational layer that all health is built upon. That is the biggest blind spot in Western healthcare.